Hello, this is Laura O'Brien from the Irish Pagan School, and I'm here with my friend and colleague and work wife and partner in the Masters, Amy O'Riordan, who some of you will know as the Crafty Cailleach. So Amy and I have been working together through the Irish Pagan School for a number of years now. Amy also teaches some classes with us at the Irish Pagan School, and we decided to do a Masters together 2 years ago. So we are here to talk about the topic of Amy's Masters, which is the Widow's Curse, which is a form of traditional magic, resistance, and social justice in Ireland. So it really was a fascinating research topic, which I was very privileged to get the blow by blow as we were going through over the years. So Amy, like, what made you do Masters? I know we both kind of went in a little bit naive, I think, maybe into
Very
doing a
much.
master's in Irish regional history while we were working and trying to have our lives and all the rest of it. So, like, what made you want to do a master's? And then, I suppose, why did you choose this topic specifically?
So I get the Masters, I feel like it was kind of just put in front of the two of us.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry for that because it was very much every time you posted whose idea was this?
No, it was
It
Amy's. It
wasn't
was
my
Amy's
idea.
idea.
It was well, it wasn't
Absolutely.
my it was an idea I think that was maybe put in front of me to put in front of both of us.
Presented.
Yes. I can't even remember how I stumbled upon it. I think it was like a Facebook ad or something, and because I had gone, so I my original degree is in French and Irish, and then I ended up that was back like 10. I finished that 10 years ago, and then I took a break. Like I went working, and I was trying to live and afford to live and all that stuff. That's quite
Hmm.
hard, and adulting and all that stuff. And then I just kind of did a bit of a 180. I got really interested in psychology, and that was kind of through my interest in witchcraft and through my interest in the occult and looking into magic and, what is magic. So that kind of was a natural progression into psychology, I feel, because I know you have a background in psychology as
Hmm.
well. And then, yeah, after doing this psychology HDIP, the pandemic hit. So, I mean,
Mm.
everything was just kind of thrown up in the air again. And I kind of realized I don't know if I actually can work in psychology. I feel like that was more for me. That was
Mm.
more a degree I needed to do for myself.
Know thyself.
Yes, absolutely. And no thyself did I do. Sitting in lectures having existential crisis after existential
Hmm.
crisis.
Hmm.
And then it was really when I kind of had that break then during the particularly in 2020 and 2021, when I had that breathing space to kind of
Mm.
revisit what like my long-term special interest is, which
Mm.
is Irish culture, Irish language, Irish history, and Irish folklore. So when it kind of presented, it was really the oral history that kind of drew, I think, both of us to,
Same. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
to the
Very much
thesis.
so. Yeah.
So we had that kind of, I suppose, just having like regional Irish history, the fact that you didn't necessarily need to have done a degree in history to do this course,
Mm.
because it did genuinely cover quite a lot. Um, I just thought, and it was part-time, and the fees actually were very nice. So the fees
Mm.
weren't too
Yeah.
bad
Very
either.
reasonable.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Thank you,
was kind
Carlow
of
College and Setu.
absolutely, yeah. Very like think it was it was a very good program. And I think just wanting to kind of move into that heritage space as well,
Mm. Yeah.
is kind of what drew me to it. But neither of us realized what we were in
Neither of
store
us
for.
knew. And I remember us having a conversation saying, even if we just kind of upskilled in our oral history, because there are specific things about the study of history, which we'd both been doing quite significantly up until that point. I had even worked for, 10 years in a heritage management job, which
Hmm.
this course then is supposed to kind of qualify us for. Work wise afterwards. Well, one of the things, obviously, in archives and all the rest of it. But yeah, I remember us talking and saying, yeah, like it'll be like that kind of an upskill, and we'll officially know what we're doing, and the oral history will be fascinating. And I know I was going to do a project initially, and my thesis was going to be on the fairy faith,
Hmm.
specifically with an oral history element to it. And for various reasons that didn't work out. But so switching thesis was a fun game.
Yeah, that was fun to watch you go through. I was
Yes.
like,
Yeah. After all of my lit review and everything was done for the fairy fates, it was like, change seats. So I switched to Ogham and the place of Ogham in the development of Irish identity.
mm-hmm.
And watching you go through, then we were both kind of working in similar time frames in the historic period, different regions, fair enough, but very much to do with kind of what was happening in Ireland at the time, obviously, as it was history. But you were taking that really kind of social justice and resistance and using magic and how magic kind of permeates. And for these women was almost kind of a last resort. So I'd love
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the widow's curse? How would you define it?
So I suppose the widow's curse is, as I was studying it, I was studying it as a form of resistance. But it really goes back, and like in doing the thesis, because the widow's curse had been kind of looked at in its own right. There's been not so much books on it. There was one thesis that I found very, very, very helpful, which was by Ian Lynch, and that was again that was like kind of 10 years old. It was 2010 or 2013. He'd
Mm,
finished that thesis. It was an MA in literature of folklore and UCD. So he would have very much been focusing on the folklore archives, which I did as well, just doing the archival bit. But there was nothing really. Anything that was done on it was kind of done from a folklore lens. There wasn't anything that was done through a history lens or through
mhm,
that historical lens. So in folklore, so in folklore and many of the stories that I would have found through um the National Folklore Commission's schools collection on Dukas, a lot of the records that I found related to evictions.
mm,
So that was kind of my focus. So it would have been something that was used as you're saying, as a last resort, with women who had been widowed, who were trying to care for their children, who'd lost probably the bulk of the money coming into the house or the labor for the farm so that they could make money and make their rent. Now, not in all cases. In some cases, they were able to make their rent, and the landlord evicted them anyway because he wanted a friend to move in, or he wanted the farm back, or whatever have you, or just because he could, because no one was going
mhm,
to stop him.
mhm,
So as a result of this, like because again, you're kind of looking at no fault evictions. They haven't really, in some cases there were arrears, but it was that kind of the social kind of etiquette would have been broken. The social contract would have been broken because the landlord's supposed to be looking after the tenants, like they're
mm,
his responsibility. So in evicting these widows, they would often, and it was kind of this ritual formula where they would fall on their knees, they would cast their eyes and their hands up to heaven and basically implore God to curse them generally for 7 generations, or several generations. For example, one that I did as a case study was the Curse of Mór. So what kind of influenced me to pick this subject was there's a couple of different things which I'll come back to in a minute. But the Curse of Mór was a case study of mine in the thesis. It was one chapter, and I had grown up with that story because I'm from Portlaw, and I had family working in the big house. They were working downstairs, of course, but they were working in the big house. And so I'd grown up with this story and many other stories of supernatural occurrences in Portlaw, particularly on the estate. And this curse was a 7 generation curse because the our local widow's son had been basically killed by the local landlord. Now, there's a couple of different versions of that story and why the landlord killed him on in the Dukas records, and also just in general folk tales as I would have
mm,
heard it as well growing up. But she basically when she came up to the house, and this story I found all throughout Munster as well. I've had same kind of iteration of this story where um, the landlord took either through disobedience, or he was asked to discipline the widow's son, or he did something, or he didn't do anything. And the landlord just kind of saw him there that day and decided, right, I'm going to discipline this boy.
mm,
Killed him, and then invited the mother up to see him. And in this particular story with Mór, she's said to have turned on her heel. And you've been to Mór, I brought yourself and John up
mm,
last summer just to go up. And the courtyard of the house is quite large. Like I'd say it's about half the size of a football field.
Mm.
So she turned on her heel at the door and walked back to the gate and then turned again at the gate and cursed him. She got on her knees and crawled through the gravel the whole way
Oh.
up to the door, cursing him the whole way. There's some accounts that say she did it in Irish, and when whichever Lord Waterford it was at the time turned around to the servants and said, "What is she saying?" They said, "Oh, she's blessing you." Because obviously he couldn't hear what she was saying, but the curse was that none of them would die in their beds.
Right.
Now, when I was looking for the thesis, I was trying to find each one to see how many of them exactly didn't die in their beds. I'm still kind of looking into that, to be honest. I didn't get a conclusive answer, but enough of them didn't die in their beds for me
More
to
than a
believe that curse.
coincidence, like, yeah.
Definitely, like
Yeah.
thrown from a horse. There was a runaway train accident in Texas. A couple of them ended up being shot, one through their own hand, and one they say is accidental. Um, and another one was found drowned. One of them was poisoned. Like there was all this random stuff for all the male heirs. But they always had an heir to take over, so there was still that next
Mm.
generation coming for the
Mm.
curse to be carried on. So that was, I suppose, that's the widow's curse. And then why I chose the topic, I think the topic kind of again kind of was there my whole life.
Mm.
So it was kind of there, but what happened was I can't remember what class exactly it was, but I remember we had a conversation about it on the way home. And I was sitting in the class one evening, and whatever was being talked about, it was, I think it was demography, and it was talking about the landed estate records and talking about like all the historical documents that we have to look at these things. And I was sitting there, and it just, again, was kind of put in front of me. I can't say
Mm.
by who definitively, but it was put in
Mhm.
front of me. You need to be looking at landed estates. You need to be looking at resistance. You need to be looking at the land war. And then through that, and also through, for something completely different, I was just researching curses myself. There's a paper which is the art of cursing, or um, I can't, it's Thomas Waters is the scholar who wrote it, who also wrote Curse Britain. So he's written an entire
Mm.
book on the history of curses in Britain, or in the UK, but not really Ireland. He has a couple of bits about Ireland dotted in through it, but he wrote a specific paper all about the history of curses in Ireland. And in it, there's just this one beautiful sentence, which was basically this is the justification for why my thesis needs to be my thesis. And that was that widows' curses had been looked at as, like, in their own right as folklore, but had not been looked at in terms of resistance to
Mm.
landlords in the 19th century. And I was like, well, that's it
That's
then.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's it.
it's women's history, it's the history of magic, and it's landed estates.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then I was further encouraged then by Dr. Regina
Donnelly.
Donlan, who is had also kind of focused on landed estates in her own research. And there was not very much being done on that kind of supernatural element
Mm.
to the landed estates. It's all very much like the art and the architecture and the families and all of that, but nothing really on the resistance, nothing really on downstairs, nothing
Yeah.
really on, the lower classes.
Exactly. Yeah. And this, like, how I suppose the real like grassroots effect of what was happening because these landed estates even exist, you know.
Mm,
And I mean, you've said a couple of times now this was kind of put in front of us, you know.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
looking back over the last kind of 2.5 years since we've done it, it really strikes me how, you know, your thesis was specifically focusing on this resistance and the landlord issues and the evictions and all the rest of it, which were playing out huge in Ireland
Hmm.
again, you know, history repeating itself again.
Hmm.
And mine then was on the OM, but not just the OM, but the development of Irish identity and kind of who are we? How do we figure out, coming out of a period of colonization, how do we figure out who we are as a people and who we
Hmm.
want to be and what's important to us and our priorities? And I really feel that, you know, Ireland is coming out of a period of our other colonization, which is the church, Catholic
Absolutely.
Church. And those are all big questions for us, and a little bit more longer of a time scale maybe. But like, do we want marriage equality? Do we want people to be able to access safe and healthy abortions? How do we treat immigrants in our country? Like, these are all massive things that really, identify who we are as a people. And I just feel like that there's bigger things at work, that this kind of new wave of research that's coming in, like the academic, with an eye to social justice, with an eye to the actual lay of the land,
Yeah.
of the country that we're studying. Like, we're taking history out of the tower, out of the ivory towers, and really putting it where it needs to be. And of course, it's not just us, of course.
No.
There's a lot more about, like, we were up at a conference in the library up in Dublin where, there was a lot, it was women's history and women's archives specifically. And it was very much about, those hidden voices or those silenced voices through history. And there's so much more work that can be done. And I love the work that you're doing on your channel as well. And, the Women of the Revolution and everything, like, and just like, so I suppose at the end of this kind of thesis process and the the journey, the trauma in some cases,
Absolutely.
How do you feel? Like, how would you conclude on the place of the widow's curse in Ireland? Like, does it still have a place now? Is it something that is still relevant, or how is it relevant to today's Ireland and today's witchcraft, Irish witchcraft?
I think, like, to answer that, I'd have to go back to the days of the bards and the filla and that's what I started off my thesis with, because if you're working in folklore, and if we were in a folklore department, I maybe wouldn't have had to do that background. Here's the tradition of the ancient tradition of Irish cursing and satire. But I started it off because I wanted to ground it within the cultural context. Like, widow's curses didn't just, I suppose, appear out of nowhere. So they are rooted in a very long tradition of poetic satire and speaking truth to power and justice. Like, that's really what's at the root of it. So I think, like, even outside of widow's curses, widows had they're specifically kind of thought to have been particularly powerful because they had carnal knowledge that priests didn't have, and priests would have been cursing as well. But they had knowledge that priests didn't have, but also they had that power of grief, and that alone, the power of like channeling that emotion into seeking justice, really was what it was. So I suppose how it's applicable today, like, even though I was technically focused on the 19th century, I did kind of creep up into the 20th and 21st because I found accounts there. So, like, there's been accounts up into the 21st century of people threatening the widow's curse, and, like, a lot of the time it wouldn't have even necessarily been the full lyrical curse they would have thrown out. It would have been just the threat of the curse would have been enough to deter a landlord or a land grabber or whoever from moving them off the land. So I think
a judge in one case, I think, if I remember correctly, somebody threatened. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They're threatening judges and solicitors and everything inside the court, on court records. So it's actually amazing, the records we have of it. Just imagine the records we don't have of it.
Right, yeah.
But yes, I think it definitely like, in terms of, as you're saying today, like, we're looking at, like, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. We're in a housing crisis anyway. I don't know if we're in the middle of it or at the end of it or at the start of it, but we have that. We're having, like, I was at an illegal eviction not so long ago. There are, like, that is still happening. Like, it's actually, it's heartbreaking that is still happening. And that was one thing when I was doing the thesis as well. It was just so emotionally horrible. It was really, really was, because you're seeing it play out in the news, and you're like, the eviction ban was literally lifted while I was doing that thesis. And then reading these accounts from 150 years ago of people going through the exact same thing, and you're like,
we were
how
addicted.
are we here?
We were addicted.
Yeah, you were evicted.
Evicted was what I meant to say.
Yeah.
We were literally evicted, you know, as you were finishing up your thesis.
Yeah. And actually at that illegal eviction, I did throw down a curse.
Good.
Yeah, because it was illegal, it was wrong, and it was just like
Absolutely.
aside from it being legally like illegal, um, it was also morally wrong, like
Mm,
completely morally wrong.
mm,
And I think like that's kind of the application of it. Like the use of satire and the use of poetry is still today also used, but just even in ancient Ireland, like it was a way to hold the leaders accountable.
absolutely. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think we could do with bringing it back, to be honest.
Well, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm not sure it's ever left because
Mhm.
we have things here like Scrap Saturday. We had even Father Ted taking away the power of the
Yeah,
Catholic Church. Um, do you know the Blind Boy podcast currently? Like he's not quite using satire, but he, you know, he could and he will, I'm sure.
yeah.
Um, but
Waterford
there's a
Whispers
lot of that
News.
at
Yeah.
Waterford Whispers, exactly. Like there is a lot of that that's really speaking truth to power in that way,
Mhm.
you know, still, and it's still a very much a part of our culture, I think.
Oh
And
no, absolutely. What I meant
yeah,
was
yeah.
just the curses, like
The actual
specifically
curse
the
part, yeah.
actual curses. Yeah.
Well, look, there's a class at the Irish Pagan School taught by Geraldine on Rosk poetry, which is like a
Hmm.
traditional form of cursing, which is supposed to be performed publicly. And it is our traditional poetry slash satire slash cursing. So if anybody wants to take it up and you know take it to the next level, please do. Um, there's also I really felt when you were going through, you know, when you're looking at the social issues that were going
Hmm.
on at the time, you know, we have disability issues, we have racism, we have attacks on minority, you know, gender and sexuality based attacks. We still have a lot in our society where the in some ways there are like powerless people who are being attacked by power, you know.
Hmm.
So I would say that that's a place for it as well, you know. And
100%.
looking at it over the last couple of decades, like a lot of people are turning to, you know, spiritualities, to reconnecting with roots, whether it's, you know, getting upset with the Catholic Church and saying what else is available, or whether it's having a bit of a dark night of the soul over, you know, the COVID crisis and pandemic, and who am I and what do I want to do with my life and what's important to me, you know. So finding that power again. And I think the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing through the Irish Pagan School is just like it's really a part of a movement, I feel.
Hmm.
Um yeah, so in your classes that you have with us,
Hmm.
where like does the Widow's Curse feature? Yes, we have a whole class
Yes, we
on
have
the
a whole,
Widow's
I did a
Curse.
whole class, and I don't know how I did it in the middle of the bloody
Mm,
thesis writing, but I did it.
yes. So if people want to find out more about it, absolutely. I'll put the link below to all of Amy's classes. We have some amazing classes taught by Amy at the Irish Pagan School. So there'll be a link to all of those below. And if people want to read your thesis, is it available? Can they get it or?
They can. So I think I have it as part of the class materials. I might need to double check that. I
Mm,
think I sent it on when it was done. So it should be part of the class materials, but I also have it available on my Ko-fi
okay.
as a like, yeah, you can download it
We
from
will
my Ko-fi.
we will put a link to that. But I do suggest that people go and check out Amy's YouTube channel as well, the
Hmm.
Crafty Cailleach. Again, links to all of this will be below. And whether you're listening to this in the podcast or watching us on YouTube, it'll be all below for you. So definitely check out Amy's work. And Amy, thank you so much for talking to us about this and for teaching and for, you know, helping to change the world.
And thank you for providing the platform to do it.
Right, we leave it there. Slán, folks. We will
Well,
have another interview with Amy. So watch this space as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. Slán.